Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. And you are joining us at a great time because we are live right now in day 2 of the penalty phase in the Scott Nelson trial. If you're just joining us, let me tell you what this case is about. So Scott Nelson was found guilty last week of the kidnapping and brutal murder of 56-year-old Jennifer Fulford. She was a nanny, a personal assistant for a family. She was abducted from that home, and her body was discovered 3 days later. Her head and face were duct taped so tight that one of the causes of death was asphyxiation. She also suffered from, she also received stab wounds to her back and chest. Really disturbing case. And this man actually took the stand and confessed to his crimes. He was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder and other charges. This is the penalty phase. The death penalty is on the table. The defense is trying whatever they can do to save the life of their client. And on the stand right now is a neuropsychologist talking about some of the brain abnormalities or issues with the defendant that they want this jury to consider. Let's go back live. Okay, well, there's the prosecutor picking away at the defense's witness, this neuropsychologist. Let's break it all down right now. I'm joined here by criminal defense attorney Norman Williams. Norman, interesting witness because he started off the day presenting some interesting evidence about the defendant, that he, might have these cognitive issues that might have been caused by a series of factors, including head injuries from a car accident. So if I'm sitting on the jury, I'm thinking, well, maybe he did have certain issues going on in his brain. He had impulse control. Maybe that's what factored in to him ultimately murdering this woman. And maybe that's a factor to consider in a death penalty case. But what's happening right now by the prosecutor?
The prosecutor is systematically trying to pick apart this guy's testimony. And what's interesting is that this expert initially was very flat, but with the prosecutor, he's starting to push back at him, which is interesting to watch.
How's he doing it? What's he trying to point? What's the main point that he's trying to say, that the defendant's making up some symptoms, or you can't believe what he's saying?
Right. The first thing that the prosecutor went at him about is malingering and what is malingering. And he very smartly tricked this expert into saying that he wasn't an expert on malingering, which is impossible. If you don't understand malingering, you can't be a psychologist, anything that studies the mind. So that was pretty funny. But he's also trying to suggest that this expert did not use the standardized method to evaluate the defendant. He also picked apart the fact that he didn't evaluate the defendant at the time of arrest. And the form of his question tried to suggest that it was the expert's fault, when it has nothing to do with the expert.
But still, if you're going to evaluate this guy, you want to know what was going on in his mind when you see him on that video cam footage right there taking Jennifer Fulford's money. Welcome back, everybody. The prosecution is continuing to question the defense's expert right now in the Scott Nelson penalty phase. Remember, this is the man who's now facing the death penalty after being convicted of the murder of Jennifer Fulford. On the stand is this neuropsychologist who was providing some pretty interesting testimony and commentary on what was going on in the mind of the defendant. Common thing, we see this a lot in death penalty cases. Prosecution is picking away what you're seeing right now. Now, I've just been told that they've gone to a recess. So, Norman, I want to ask you a quick question about this. Sure. How does this really factor into the death penalty case? Because, I mean, at the end of the day, this jury said, Scott Nelson, you murdered this woman. You made that choice. First-degree murder, most serious charge. What does it matter what's going on in his mind?
It matters if the jury feels that there's something that excuses his conduct, if there's something about him that couldn't make any other choice but the one that he made, unfortunately. And if he came into this world with some deficits, some cognitive deficits, or some other physical condition that he couldn't help, then possibly his life should be spared.
Is that the same thing with what we saw earlier today, learning about his history, his relationship with his father, any traumatic moments in his life? These are the things a jury should really consider?
That as well, but also hearing from family members, from friends, co-workers, colleagues, those are the things that humanize a person. You want to know more about the individual than the bad act that they committed.
Right.
And just starting there sometimes just doesn't tell you much about who they are and where they come from.
Because if you're going to recommend the death penalty here, you're not only killing someone's bad act, but you're killing that person. And
that's right.
That's the thing. So let's go back to the defense's opening statement. in this penalty phase and where they basically summarize what this jury should be thinking about. Norman, I guess the question I have is, have you ever seen somebody who commits the worst act someone could commit and have a good upbringing and have no problems, no mental trauma? You see what I'm saying? I mean,
Yes. How
much does this matter in the sense of, yeah, everybody has some bad stuff going on, but you tell me, have you ever seen somebody with a perfectly clean record, perfect upbringing, and if so, is that worse or better off for the defendant?
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it all. I've seen people with a horrible upbringing. I've seen people with a great upbringing, and I've seen people in the middle.
What's better for them in terms of for a jury to hear?
I think people have more sympathy for someone who's had a hard life. And a hard life garners more sympathy than a lengthy prison sentence, let's say. You know, so because there are people that have hard lives that will never commit a crime, never do jail time.
Right.
That'll just kind of persevere and then they break down.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's go back to this man. Let's learn more about what his early life was like, and we learned all about it from James Nelson. This is his brother, and by the way, they haven't seen each other in 25 years. Gives you an understanding of maybe how close they are, but it does illuminate the upbringing of Scott Nelson. Let's show it to you. So having a physically and verbally abusive father definitely works for the sympathy plea. I have a question though. When we play this and we show these kinds of upbringings, they're common characteristics where you'd say, you know, this is something that could lead someone to eventually commit crimes, or this is somebody who could lead somebody to eventually murder an innocent woman like Jennifer Fulford. Are these common upbringings?
Yeah, a lot of times the children of abusive households, they just get mean, you know. Like sometimes boys are just turned into these mean individuals from, you know, abuse at the hands of the parents. And it makes it easier to make those decisions in the street in terms of employing violence to get what you want. And,
right.
And not having any empathy for your victims.
Well, if there's one thing that can be said, Mr. Nelson wants his story to get out. We talked about this with these witnesses and also when he took the stand. During the course of his brother's testimony, the prosecution objected, and the defendant wasn't too happy about that because he himself, not his attorneys, objected in open court. Okay, so a couple of things. He apparently wanted his brother's story to keep coming out. He wasn't happy about the interruptions. How do you control a client like that?
At the best that you can. I mean, all you can do is remind them that they're not helping themselves, and hope that they comply with your request.
Why do you think he took such an issue with the prosecution there?
I think he really wanted his brother to keep talking. He really wanted that stream of information to come out, and he didn't like the fact that the objection could have been sustained.
Oh boy, if that was the only strange thing we saw from the defendant during the course of this trial, but it sure wasn't. All right, so I'd like to think that I can read people pretty well. He seems to be a bit annoyed at this line of questioning. What is going on here, Norman? What are they trying to get at? What's the state trying to get at?
Yeah, it sounds like the prosecutor's trying to suggest to him that there's something in his field that he's just not privy to, aware of, and he's just not following standard evaluations of data.
And experts don't like to be questioned about their qualifications or their findings, do they?
They don't. And the problem with, I guess, the barrier between professionals is that experts feel one way about what they do, and nobody likes to be questioned by a lawyer. I don't care who
We get a
you
bad
are.
rep. We get a bad rep. What can I say? Rightfully so at times. Let's jump back, and Norm and I are going to break down what we're seeing. Okay, so we just saw the conclusion of the state's examination of this witness. How'd they do?
He did pretty well. I think if I was him, I would have hammered him a little bit more, but he poked a lot of holes in this doctor's findings and results, and his discussion of ecological validity, although that term itself, if there is no ecological validity, it doesn't disqualify a study, but basically what that requires is that the questions that you're asking and the materials that you're using in the examination of a person has to mirror real life situations. And my thing is, how do you do that in a situation where someone ends up dead?
Right.
You know, it makes sense that if you're going to do, let's say, a mock jury exercise, that you want your questions in that setting to mimic what happens in real juror selection situations and trials.
Well, let me ask you this. Taking into consideration what he talked about with the defendant and all of these issues, watching him on the stand, that was a weird thing to watch.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you look at that and say, well, maybe the neuropsychologist is right about some things?
Right, right. No, I mean, he knows what he's doing, but the problem, I think, with experts a lot of times is that jurors just kind of perceive the expert as being the pawn of the side that calls the expert.
Sure.
Which makes it very important to make that expert's testimony sound like standard, followed, and settled science.
And that's why they're always questioning about how much they're getting paid and the history of finding the same kinds of problems in other defendants. We see this constantly here on Law and Crime. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, a lot more to break down. We may jump live. Who knows what to expect next in the penalty phase for Scott Nelson. We'll be right back. All right, Norman, break this down for me. He had serious issues and wasn't making up what was going on with him, or he was?
He wasn't. I think in some instances he felt he was, and some he didn't. But I think that in general, this witness is really doing a good job on redirect.
Right. That
he's fixing up some of the holes that got poked during cross.
You know, it's all about Scott Nelson, and we talk so much about when he took the stand during the trial phase to determine what should happen. Now that's the penalty phase. Are we going to see this man retake the stand and give his opinion?
I think he is. I mean, he has that type of personality that cannot control himself.
What's he going to say? Is he going to repeat everything that he said during the trial?
Probably, and he's probably going to try to have a bigger discussion about what's wrong with the prison system and society, and try to maybe focus a little bit more on what about him is bad, but then also he has to highlight the good sides of himself.
Let me ask you this, and everything he did is horrific and nothing justifies it. But his rant about the criminal justice system, that he's a product of it, he explained everything that happened to him in prison, and then he says he's left on the street, his probation officer got him fired. I don't know if that's true or not. His defense team has said that's the case. Does he have a point that the criminal justice system breeds repeat offenders like this?
That is true. It does breed repeat offenders. That's
who turn to murder?
But not that. Like, I think that there are some connections between his general behavior and doing long stretches in prison. But in terms of deciding to take a life, you don't need to do a day in prison to come to that conclusion that you feel entitled to take a life.
About 20 seconds left, but he thinks he's justified even to this day.
Yeah, collateral damage. They should have given him his pizza. They should have given him all of his medical needs.
Pretty incredible to watch.
It is.
Norman Willaims, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it as always. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a break on our end. We're going to keep a careful eye on the courtroom feed. We're going to wait to jump back. Interesting day so far in day 2 of this penalty phase. Big decision for the jury. Once it goes to their hands, who knows which way they'll decide. We'll be right back right after this.